Already great. So it is a thrill, an honor, and a privilege to be with Cody Gibson today. Cody's journey is nothing short of remarkable, a story of resilience and grit that began at age 12 in Alaska when he was paying his mother $75 a month to live in a boat in their front yard after she had rented out his former bedroom. From those humble and challenging beginnings, Cody has built an extraordinary life and career marked by perseverance, vision, and leadership. For those of you who don't know Cody, he's a vice president of Keller Williams Realty International, the world's largest real estate franchise by agent count and the U.S. leader in units and sales volume. Cody currently serves as a leader of Keller Williams MAPS Coaching. MAPS Coaching was awarded a Stevie Award for Sales Training and Coaching Program of the Year and was the first real estate company to be nominated for the Prism Award for Excellence in Coaching. And that's not all. Cody is the owner and CEO of United Home Group and Portland Real Estate, which currently operates in over 24 states across the U.S. and sells approximately 1,000 homes annually. Those numbers might have changed since I looked at them last, but I think that's somewhere in the ballpark. Cody is passionate about helping others find success. He is a highly sought-after speaker and a business coach. And when I think of Cody Gibson, the word that comes to mind to me, I always try to find one word that's kind of a tag for people, and it would be empowering. Cody, you are an empowering individual.
Oh, thank you.
So let's get started, and I'd love to find out how you found your way into real estate.
All right. What a great introduction. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's interesting when I got into real estate, uh, I don't know that I know very many people. I know I've met a couple who wanted to get into real estate when they were a kid. But I don't remember. I mean, not very many people grew up. Not many people went to their high school counselor's office and had him or her say, "I think you should be a realtor. I think you should be a used home salesman." I don't. That doesn't really happen. No one says that in high school. So that's not the trajectory for people. We just kind of end up there for a myriad of 6 or 8 reasons. For me, um, I was selling diesel engines to commercial fishermen and mines and truck and rigs. Remember the show Ice Road Truckers?
Sure.
Um, when I worked for the diesel engine company, we built the first uh, powered generators to build those ice roads. And so we built them on these skids, parked them in the back of the trucks, and the trucks drove them backwards in reverse on the tundra in Alaska. And my job was to build the engine, the generator that powered the engine to pump the water to build the ice roads. And I remember when they called me to build these things, and I remember the bid that I gave them, and they immediately said yes. And then I saw them on the show, and I immediately regretted how much I bid to build these things. But during that time, I had a friend who was in real estate, and he said, "Let's go get lunch." I'm not sure I've had lunch out of the office since, but he said, "Let's get lunch." We're driving to lunch. He picks me up. Man, Rick, I look over, and in the cup holders between us, there was a check, and that check was made out to him, and it was facing me, which I don't think was an accident, but it was for 12,000 bucks, and I'd never seen a check for 12,000 bucks. And I'm doing the math. I get paid. I didn't know that realtors didn't get paid every 2 weeks. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. And I looked at him and I thought, and this idiot, he's my friend. This idiot's making $24,000 a month. Man, I'm in the wrong business. So I start like peppering him with questions. And he immediately goes, "Oh." And so while we were at lunch, it was Thursday, while we were at lunch, um, he invites me to go meet his sales manager at the real estate company. And that's how it all started. Like that was it. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what needed to be done. I ultimately was told, "Hey, take this class, do this, take these things." I remember when I actually went back for the interview, it was also on a Thursday. I remember when I went back for the interview, I walked out to my car afterwards and I thought, you know what I should do? I should make money on teaching people how to interview because I'm so good. I'm the best at interviewing. These idiots hired me on the spot. Man, they didn't check my references. They didn't ask me any, like, they didn't need any, they hired me on the spot. That's how good of a talker I am. It should have been a, Should have been a clue to me that it was the only interview I'd ever been to, that they asked me to write them a check at the end of the interview. But somehow I didn't, it didn't register. But I didn't know that the brokerage wanted me more than I wanted the brokerage back then. I've learned that since, but I didn't know it then. And so that was the gist. That was the entrance. Spent the majority of the money that I had, like most people who start real estate. You learn all the expenses you didn't know that you were going to have, and then you have to make it work. And that would have been, gosh, that goes back to the year 2000. So right after that whole Y2K kerfuffle, and then I went into real estate.
Interesting. That's a great story. Yeah, for sure. Um, so in this process, you discovered a superpower. Maybe you knew it before that, but when did you kind of realize that you had this power within that you've used and have helped a lot of people with?
I think, I've got a mentor of mine used to always ask me, what's your superpower? And he would ask the room that we were speaking in or teaching in, what's your superpower and who are you and what makes you different than anybody else? And man, I'm not sure I've ever really landed on one. But the one that shows up routinely for me is, I guess it could be wrapped up in the word grit, I suppose. I love Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, but I don't know that I landed on the word grit for it. But for me, you can't beat somebody who doesn't stop. You can't beat somebody who won't quit. They continue to get up. They get knocked. You can't beat that person because they're fighting a different fight. They're competing in a different arena. So for me, if I care about it, I just don't stop at it. And if it takes longer, so be it. I suppose if I had to narrow a superpower, it'd be that. One of the things I love the most is seeing other people win and achieve at something, which kind of naturally led me towards coaching and teaching and speaking. Um, but I also love to produce. And so that's why today I still have a active real estate business and an active real estate team because I still love to produce. I still love to be in the field. Um, and I love to teach and train. So everything I do today kind of revolves around a handful of things, which is helping real estate agents make more money, save more time, or be smarter. So make them richer, make them smarter, save them time. Anything I promote or push or do on social media or do in my business life kind of goes through those filters. Will this make my audience, my friends, real estate agents, will it make them richer? Will it make them smarter? Will it save them time? And if I could cover two of the three, I'll move forward. If I could cover three of the three, I'll move forward right now. So that's kind of the filter that I'll put everything through. I was writing a class this weekend and it was, the filter was, does it make them richer? Does it make them smarter? Does it save them time? And it was all three. And so that was something that when we met this morning with the team, it was, okay, this goes in right now. We do this right now. If it's two of the three, then it's got time to take flight. Um, but back to your question of when did you realize that? I think that you learn lessons, but you don't understand what they meant until later. And one that I think of regularly, um, like the story comes up sometimes of, renting that boat from my mom to live in, or renting a room, my own room, to live in. That story comes up once in a while, and it's been shared a little bit. It's not my favorite story, but it is the story I came from, so I'm 100% fine with it. But my mom kind of gets a bad rap. Like when you tell that story as a parent, and I've got three kids, right? As a parent, I go, oof, I could never charge my, like, are you kidding me? I've got a daughter who's older today. She's 16. She's older today than when I became the youngest manager in Kmart history. I was 15 when I did that, which is a whole different story. Um, but I
A
look
great
at her
story.
and I just, yeah, it's my background. And so when I look at her and I see her struggling with things in life that I too struggled at 16, I remember thinking we lived two real different lives. My other little girl, who's 14, turning 14 in 2 weeks, I moved out just after my 14th birthday. I turned 14 in June, and I was out of the house that fall by like October. So I look at her who's turning 14, Rick couldn't fathom her moving out of the house. If she tried to move, I'd go find her. Couldn't even imagine her moving out of the house in a few months. Um, but my mom was a single mom and was trying to make ends meet. And I had a job, delivering newspapers, delivering two paper routes when I was 11, and I was making like $300 a month. Well, when you're 11, which was also over 30 years ago, that was not bad money. I was the richest person I knew at 11 years old. Like I'd load my friends' money, I would buy stuff, and my mom was like, "Hey, and everyone's kind of had to pitch in, and so I had to pay rent." And then ultimately she could rent my room and my brother's room out for more money than what we could pay. And so we would go live with extended family or go stay with other people. And then we would always be like, hey, we want to move home. But I remember I was telling my wife the other night, I said, it's funny what you think about. Um, from like 8 years old to, and I stopped going to school when I was 14. So like 10th grade, I was done. But during that time frame, I was the new student or the new kid in class. It was like 16 different times, which is a lot of times to be the new kid. It's a lot of times to make a new set of friends. It's a lot of times to be, new to that school and not have your own clique and not have your own group. And man, in a season of time where young men and women are struggling for identity and things are already hard as nails, like everything is tough for them, to change schools repeatedly, even tougher. Um, but I would have been 12, and I'll land back on the story that you asked. I would have been 12, and I had this paper route. And we had moved from one part of town, we lived in Juneau, Alaska, to another part of town, and the paper route was in where we used to live, and I had to take the city bus to get there. And when the paper company hired me, they said, "Hey, what's your address so we can have the papers delivered there?" And I immediately knew I had a problem because if I gave them my address of where I lived, it was 12 or 14 miles from where the paper route was, and I had lied about the neighborhood I lived in. And I said, "Oh, shoot, I always get it mixed up. Can I call in the morning and give you my address?" And the lady was like, sure, okay." And so I zipped down to that neighborhood, took the bus, zipped over to that neighborhood, and I start knocking on doors. And I'm just like asking people, "Hey, can I?" And the first three or four doors I knocked on, I remember just being like, "Hey, can I use your address for?" And it was called the Juneau Empire. That was the name of the paper. "Can I use your address to have the Juneau Empire deliver papers here?" And they were like, no. I mean, now that I'm an adult, I can't imagine what I would say if some kid like knocked on my door and said, "Hey, can I use your address?" I'd probably like, "Get out of here." Um, anyway, my script got a little better, if you will, by the time I'd been to 8 or 10 or 12 doors. And I don't know how many doors it was, but it wasn't a whole lot, but it sure felt like a lot. But I knocked on the door and I'd gotten pretty good about my pitch at that point because you learn what doesn't work. And this lady answers the door, Rick, and I swear to you, she was 200 years old. I'm sure she wasn't, but when you're 12, she seemed like she was 200. And I kind of went into my pitch, and she was so sweet. And she just kind of ultimately interrupted me and said, um, uh, of course you can. Of course you can." And um, she said, "But one condition. I want you to stop and have a snack with me or a treat with me, or have," she loved tea, "or have tea with me a couple of afternoons a week." And I said, "Okay." Like, I would have said okay to anything. She could have asked me anything, and I would have said yes. And ultimately, her name was Ida. And man, for months, probably close to a year, she found out after a few weeks, home life wasn't amazing. And, her idea of a snack was she would feed me, but she'd feed me enough food for dinner. And after like a month or two, she wouldn't just give me dinner. She would give me another meal, like wrapped in foil in a bag. And she would say, "Here, Cody, take this in case you get hungry." She never made me feel bad. She never ever brought up the fact, "I know you don't have another meal at home." She just said, "In case you get hungry." Um, which I think is really important for, a young man or a young woman at 12 or 13. If she would have mentioned how she knew I needed it, I probably would have declined. But she didn't. She just said, "In case you get hungry." Anyway, probably about a year into having the newspaper, And we started meeting every day. Like I would always go side her. She was so nice. Um, about a year in, I got there one day, walked from the bus stop, and there were like three or four cars, and there was never any cars there. There's like three or four cars, and I walked to the door, and there was like people there. Nobody was ever there. She was always alone. I found out that she was lonely, like her family had moved. They didn't spend any time with her. I mean, I didn't know what that meant, but I realize it today. Anyway, a young man opens the door, and I find out that it's her son. And I'd heard her talk about him, and he said, "Are you Cody?" And I said, "Yeah, yes, yes, I am." And he goes, "Okay." Mom, mom passed away, and she had put in her will that you could continue to have your newspapers delivered here, which, I mean, at the time I was like, good, because I need my paper. Like, I didn't, it was, wow, man. I was trying to pay rent. I was trying to go to school. I was trying to get a girl to go to the dance with me. Like, I had my own set of problems. But in the moment, I was like, oh, that's great. And of course, I was really appreciative. But man, it wasn't until I was older, when I realized what that meant. It wasn't until I wrote a will that I remember thinking, man, she took the time to tell her attorney or whoever, right? Put this in there. And then she took the time to tell her kids, hey, this young man can get his papers delivered here. And whoever buys the house has to agree to let him to continue to get his papers delivered here. And you just, like, I think about it sometimes in my life. I think, and who am I being like an Ida for? Like, who am I being that person for? Who would tell a story someday that I did something that truly changed the trajectory of their life? And it was just a paper route, just a paper route. But it was my first venture into working for myself or doing my own thing or being an entrepreneur. It was downtown Juneau, so it was a whole bunch of federal buildings, capital of Alaska, of course. There was federal buildings, Coast Guard people, state workers, blah, 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 blah. And about half of the route was houses. The rest were businesses. And so they would give me two newspapers for, that were just like extras in case there was a miscount, or in case I could give one to somebody who then maybe would want to buy a subscription. Well, I realized real fast where I could make money because somebody would go, "Oh, do you have an extra paper?" And I go, "Oh, yeah." And I'd give them a paper. And I remember making a comment about the subscription. I said, "Hey, I can get you signed up or whatever." And he just said, "I'm good." And he handed me $1. The paper's 50 cents. Free for me, 50 cents in the box, though. And I went, huh. The next day, when I was delivering newspapers, I walked past his desk holding a paper and said, "Need a paper today?" And he goes, "Yep." And he gave me $1. It didn't take too long before every single day I went right by his desk. "Do you need a paper?" And he'd give me $1. And then one day I walked by and there was $1 sitting on the desk. So I took it and I put a paper down. Long story short, over the course of a few months, I ended up, Rick, with like 30 or 40 customers. I had to keep them on a notepad, 30 or 40 customers that had kind of a bandit paper route with me. And they all paid 50 cents, a buck. There was one person who paid $1, but every Friday gave me $5. I was making more money on my second paper route than my first paper route, but they only gave me two free papers. So here's what I did. I went to one of the paper boxes. You can't even find a paper box today. They're extinct. But I would go to the paper box and I'd put in 50 cents and there'd be a whole stack of papers in there. And I'd take most of them. I would just take them and I'd shove them in my big old Juno Empire Paperboy bag. And nobody questioned the Paperboy. Like they could watch you doing it. Nobody would think you're stealing it. Um, and so between the two paper routes, I'm making like 500 or $600 a month, which at 12 is all the money I needed, right? Like that paid for the bus pass every month. It paid rent to my mom every month. It paid for groceries. It paid for school clothes shopping. When you grow up poor, you grow up every time the teacher gives you a thing to take home to get signed that needs like $10 or $20 or whatever to pay for the field trip or whatever. You grow up with anxiety because you know that it's always no, or you know that your parents will make you feel bad about it or tell you you got to figure that out on your own or whatever. But I remember like I loved playing basketball, and the deal was I was allowed to play basketball when I was 12, but I had to pay for it myself and I had to find my own rides. It's really hard when you have a network this small. And at the time, one of the coaches, um, well, it wasn't one of the coaches, my teacher, his name was Rocky. He was a teacher intern, wasn't even the teacher, he was an intern. He was going through school to become a teacher, found out that I had this problem. And so he said, no problem. I live near you and I got to go that way anyway. I'll just stop and pick you up and drop you off at basketball. But I found out later he didn't live anywhere near me. He actually lived on the other side of town. And again, he never made me feel that. He never said, hey, sounds like you've got a horrible home life or blah, blah, blah. There was never any pity. He lied and said, I live near you, which he didn't. But that was how I played basketball. That was a long story.
No, that was looking forward to more of it. I guess a
But when you
question that
ask
comes out of that.
superpower, that's what I
Yeah.
think. I think of those people.
Yeah, really talk about a superpower and special people. Uh, the grit that came along with, I mean, those people helped you, but you had to internalize and make the work happen. So,
Yes.
what do you, was that survival? What would you pass along to somebody else who is trying to sort themselves out, I guess, at any age?
I don't know. I think survival is a big part of it. I think that but I think for the human being, like I spent a little bit of time as a medic riding the ambulance. And I spent a little bit of time in search and rescue, where we would go out and we'd find, lost hikers or hurt hunters, or, occasionally it would be like a body recovery where you knew what you were going to go find. Plane would crash and you'd have to go, whatever. But when you work with people like that, you realize how fast the will to survive is for human beings against any odds. Like they'll do anything. Like, oh, I'm, my internal organs are shutting down, but I'm going to do anything it takes to survive. Or, my arm is massively hurt or missing, and I'm going to do anything it takes to survive. Like we had found this guy that had fallen off a cliff, hurt himself tremendously bad, and he crawled like 7 or 8 miles back to civilization. And that's a will to survive. And then you find somebody who wakes up in the morning as a real estate agent and needs to contact some people and ask how they could help them. And they somehow have a problem doing that. They're like, nah, I don't know, man. That's a big ask. I'm not sure I can pull that off. That's a whole lot to, and you're like, I get out of here. This guy crawled through the forest on his lips for 8 miles. And so I think about that will to survive. I think for me, I've always been really clear that, and again, I didn't know it until later. If you want something bad enough, it doesn't matter what it takes. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you'll do whatever it takes. When you get hung up on what it takes to achieve something, um, well, I'll tell you another story. The first time I went to see a fitness trainer because I was fat, I asked the trainer, I was probably 22 or 23. I'd been a realtor for a few years, making great money, spent most of it on food and ate it all. And so I'm grossly overweight. And I asked the trainer, how long is this going to take? And he looks at me and he goes, you didn't get this fat overnight. And I'm like, well, that's kind of rude, but also true. Okay, all right, very true. But I asked him again, like, how long? And he looked at me and kind of shook his head. And Ricky said, I know you're not that committed by the questions you're asking. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, listen, all I know is this. When my clients ask me over and over and over, how long is it going to take? How long is it going to take? How long is it going to take? All they're doing in their mind is negotiating how long am I willing to pretend to get the results I want? He said people like that haven't made the decision to make it a lifestyle. People like that haven't made the decision it doesn't matter how long it takes. And again, I didn't know then what that lesson meant, but 10 or 15 years later, I understood, man, that's kind of like asking how long is it going to take to be a great dad? How long is it going to take to be a great mom? How long is it going to take to be the best version of a follower of my faith as I understand it? How long is that going to take? And you think about those big questions in life, probably forever, probably the rest of your days, probably until you don't breathe anymore is how long that's going to take. And your negotiation with it doesn't make it any better. And so when I think about things, if it's worth doing, man, it kind of doesn't matter how long it takes. And I grew up in an environment where I knew I didn't want any more of what I had, and I didn't know what the opposite looked like, so I just did the opposite. I knew I didn't want more of this, so I just did this. Um, and it doesn't matter. And there's costs that you pay, and I've certainly paid a lot, and others have paid far more than I have. Um, Many have paid like the ultimate cost, right? Like I grew up my whole life, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL, and hence the ambulance and the medic and working in the search and rescue teams, and hence all that. Like that was all towards becoming a Navy SEAL. And when I was, this was right before becoming a real estate agent, but when I was 18, 17 actually, I was negotiating with the Navy. They said, we're not going to make you a SEAL. You're welcome to join the Navy, and then you can like sign up to go to BUDS training, and we'll see what happens. And and I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm only going to join if you make me a SEAL. And they said, we don't do that. And I said, okay. I'm only going to join if you promise me I can go to the BUDS training. That's it. And it took about a year. A friend of mine's dad was an admiral with the Coast Guard for Alaska at the time, and so he wrote a letter. I had gotten to know the late um, um, Senator Don Young, and he had written a letter for me, and the Navy ultimately said yes. And so they said, okay, we'll make you a Navy SEAL. And I said, I need you to send me the dates and the plane tickets. Like, I want you to prove it to me. I'm not joining and like just doing whatever job. Anyway, long story short, everything was done. They had made me a medic on a SEAL platoon, but I still had to go and do all the schools. And the deal was if I failed out of any of the schools or rung the bell, then I was in the Navy for, the next 4 years at their, at their discretion. You tell me the job. Said deal. I go to day number one for the entrance program, and they're doing all the tests and the things, and they get to the eye test, and the lady goes, "How long have you been colorblind?" And I was kind of a smart aleck, and I said, "I don't know, probably my whole life." Like I didn't know I was colorblind. You only see colors the way you see them, and until you realize that you don't see them like other people. Like people ask me today, they're like, "Oh, you're colorblind. What does this look like to you?" I'm like, "I don't know. It looks like the color I see. I don't know. It looks like the color I see the whole time of my life." And she goes, "Okay." And then I went on to the next, little entrance thing. And I knew something was wrong, and someone came and got me, and they quit doing the entrance stuff. And they put me in this room with no windows. And a couple of hours later, somebody walks in and says, "We can't make you a Navy SEAL." And I'm like, "Well, that was the deal. What are you talking about?" And they said, "Well, you're colorblind." And I said, "So what?" I said, "Just point me in the direction of the bad guys. I don't think it matters what colorblind is." And he goes, "Well, yeah, but if we ask you to cut the blue wire and you cut the wrong one, that's a problem." And I went, "No, that's a really good point." So they offered me a few other jobs in the Navy, which I probably should have taken. They were all very cool, but I was just so set on becoming a SEAL. I said no. So I flew home. Anyway, 2 years later, the Navy called. I was a real estate agent at this point. 2 years later, the Navy called and said, "Hey, we allow color corrective lenses like pilots would wear, and we'd like to offer you the exact same deal." And that would have been, I think it was the summer of 2000. And I said no, because at this point, I'm making a couple hundred grand a year and no one's shooting at me. Things are really good. But the reason I tell that story is that you never know how life unfolds. It was just months later when it was September 11th. And had things all worked out, and had I said yes at that point, I would have just been finishing all of the schools and actually been on a SEAL platoon when they shipped a bunch of SEALs over to fight that war. And a whole lot didn't come home. And so when I think about sacrifice, or I think about, what we all give up to achieve what we want, I'm constantly reminded that everything I've given up is always short of my life. Never have to give that. I've never had to give that up. I've never even had to think, okay, I'll give my life up right now. Never had to think that way. And so, the things that I give up and the things that most business people give up is usually sleeping in. It's usually comfort. It's usually pride or ego, or I don't want to look foolish, or I don't want to have to beg for business. I don't want to look a certain way, or I don't want to tell my friends and family that I need them to help me, or it'd mean the world to me if they would support my business. And to follow up on somebody who's told me, no, no, I'm going to work with somebody else. Um, so when I think about what we give up to achieve, I don't know. I don't know that we give up very much at all. I've never had to lay my life down for it.
Outstanding. Cody, I know we're close to time, so I don't want to. I want to be confident of that or
Oh, no,
conscious
no
of
one's
that.
come and knocked on the door yet. So yeah,
Well, if we
no
can
one's
keep
come and
talking,
knocked
then
yet. So
if
yeah,
that's the high point or the high sign that it's time to get off, and let's do that. So maybe you've answered this already, but I'd love to know if you were the 12-year-old kid again today, what would you tell them?
you're loved. I would have, if I could go back, I would say you're loved. They're just not here yet. 'Cause I've struggled with that my whole life. And when you grow up that way and you have a childhood like that, and and the thing is, like I said, my mom gets a bad rap, because people hear this side of the story. They also don't see the side of the story where she worked two or three jobs to try to keep things together, where she did the things that she could do. And, um, those things have shaped my life. But I would have said you're loved and they're just not here yet. But you're loved. You'll find that and you'll be accepted. And it's okay. Uh, if I could go back to my 15-year-old self, I would have told my 15-year-old self, you don't have to work this hard. And it wasn't until, I mean, and I didn't meet Gary Keller until I was 20. I mean, I met him. He didn't meet me until I was much older. But when I was 20, 25, 26, starting a market center for Keller Williams in Alaska was when I met him. He just didn't know who I was yet. You ever have like those mentors that you know them, but they don't know that they're mentoring you?
There's a guy
That
named
was
Cody
that was the
Gibson.
relation.
Yeah, I know people like
Yeah,
that.
that's very honoring to say that. But it was a few years before he would have known my name. But at that point in my life, I start hearing from this guy, and I start realizing how important it is to live, how important it is to have fun, how important it is to have a life outside of work. And that doesn't diminish how big or how important the work is. It just doesn't mean it's the purpose. The purpose wasn't the work. The work opens up the rest of the purpose. But at 15, I remember my best friend had died, and and I skipped the funeral. Our whole friend group that was all part of that search and rescue team, they all flew to the funeral. They all went. I mean, and I was like, nah, I can't make it. I worked this weekend. Can't make it. I don't know, man. I was a manager at Kmart. I don't remember, but I am certain there was another manager who would have filled in that weekend. I'm certain all I had to do was say, hey guys, I've got a funeral. There would have been no questions asked. Get the hell out of here. You can't, we're not letting you come to work this weekend, would have been the answer. But to me, work was more important. And man, I regretted that. Like I regretted it deeply the day it happened, and I regretted it more as I got older and realized how special and important those real friendships are. Like you think about that Harvard study about happiness, right? And skip to the end of the Harvard study, and the end of the study after decades was the quality of relationships determined how happy people's lives were. Wasn't the money, wasn't the status, wasn't the stuff, certainly wasn't the boats. As it turns out, even if you're rich, you can only be on one boat at a time anyway. Um, and so it wasn't any of that. It's quality of relationships. And man, I regretted that deeply. I still regret that, which is why, like, when someone goes, oh, live a life of no regrets, I always just kind of scratch my head and say, well, shoot, I've already failed at that. I've got lots of regrets. And I think the difference is when people say live a life of no regrets, there is no life of no regrets, I don't think. But I think what they mean to say as a motivational speaker is don't dwell on those. And for God's sake, stop repeating them. But I got plenty of things if I could go back in time, I wouldn't do the way I did them the first time. Therefore, they are regret.
Mm. Well, you've got a tremendous circle of influence in your life right now. What's it like to be, amongst that circle and the differences that you're making in people's lives?
I mean, on one hand, it's highly humbling. Like it's very humbling. Like I never lose sight of the fact that I get to breathe really rare air and I get to hang out with some of the coolest people. I had two calls this morning with some of the coolest real estate agents who have ever walked the earth. Um, and that what they're doing, what they're accomplishing, like they're living these lives that are far beyond, the thought of listing some homes or buy, selling some houses or working with somebody, like just living these giant business lives and making these giant decisions. And I get to go along for the journey in that. I get to be a part of it. So I'm always humbled how rare that air is, and the things that we can do that increase or impact people's lives is very, very humbling to me. It's also very, very hard work. Like it's very, very fast paced. It's very hard work. The stakes are high. You don't make any less mistakes. I make the same number of mistakes today as I've always made. The problem is they feel different because the stakes are higher. So the mistakes I make today are played out in a public view, like, oh, Cody messed this up, or we misjudged that, and this didn't happen. It's rare that my mistakes are just shared with myself now, so that's humbling. But the wins are too. Like those come hand in hand. The wins are seen by other people, and they go, "Oh, that was a great idea," or that worked out great, and we get to share that. Um, yes, I don't take any of that for granted. It's a cool place to be.
How do you look back on your those experiences that were challenging for you growing up? Um, what if you had those in your life? What do you think it might look like?
Man, I don't know. Like there's always been a person or a relationship that I didn't know how important it was at the time. And okay, my mom had this boyfriend, and he kind of floated in and out of our lives. We lived with him 2 or 3 times. He lived with us 2 or 3 times. I was a kid. I knew it didn't seem right. Later in life, I realized how messed up the relationship was. But in the moment, um, and he could be terrible to me. But at the same time, I was going to the seventh grade dance and I didn't have any clothes to wear. And he took the afternoon off work and went and bought me a shirt and a tie and a belt and made sure that I was dressed nice for the dance. By the way, if you're listening to this podcast and you're a seventh grader, don't wear a shirt and tie and belt to your dance. It was terrible. But the thought counted. Like he was trying to do the best he could for me, and the tie was like this horrible golf tie. It was terrible, but the thought mattered, and um, he was also terrible at the same time. I remember one night, food was really hard for me, which is why I struggled with weight later in life. But part of growing up was mom had her food and the kids had their food, and they didn't mingle. Like we had a shelf in the fridge that the kid food was on, and it was the cheaper food and peanut butter and jelly, whatever. And we had like a shelf in the pantry, but we couldn't touch mom's food. We got in whole lot of trouble if we ate the wrong food. And so food, like I always had like this weird thing with food, right? Like my kids today have a fridge full of food and eat whatever you want, and they could care less. They could not care less, and I cared because it was taken away from me. But anyway, one night I remember I had ice cream, and I didn't get a lot of ice cream, and I loved ketchup on everything. I put it on eggs, put it on meat, like ketchup on everything. It was disgusting. Now that I love to cook food, I wouldn't put ketchup on hardly anything except for French fries, where it belongs, like a normal human. But at the time, I would put ketchup on everything this guy would make, and he was always wildly offended. Like, who cares what a 12-year-old puts on their food, man? Get out of here. But I would put ketchup on everything, and he'd be offended. And he came over one night, and he'd been drinking. And I was eating this bowl of ice cream, and he goes, "Oh." And I said, "Oh, yeah, whatever." And he goes, "Well, I know how to make that taste better." And he walked over and covered it in ketchup and ruined it. And you learn at a young age, you can't trust anybody, which isn't 100% true, because that's also the guy who made sure I had clothes to wear to my dance. That's also the guy that helped me catch my first fish. That's also the guy that later in life, when I first moved to Anchorage, Alaska from Juneau, Alaska, um, uh, I was living in my truck, and he was the only person I knew in Anchorage, so I called him. Him and my mom didn't work out, but I called him and said, "Hey George, I'm in Anchorage," and he said, "Oh, okay, and where are you staying?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, you can't live in a parking lot forever. Why don't you come stay with me?" And for a couple of months, he let me stay on the couch. Like, it was uncomfortable and it was someone's living room, but on one hand, he's the guy who poured that ketchup on my ice cream, and it's still a traumatic experience for me. But at the same time, he was also the guy that said, "Come stay on my couch. Can't live in a parking lot." There's always been somebody who did something or showed up. And so in my world, I rely heavily on people. Um, I'm not the smartest guy when it comes to books. I'm not the smartest guy when it comes to, algorithms or models or systems, but I do understand people, and people show up at a certain time for a certain reason. Even the guy at the grocery store that I was staying in the parking lot in the back of my car, and he was the store manager at the grocery store, the Safeway, and he walked out one day and he like knocked on my car and he goes, "Are you living here?" And I said, no, no. And he kind of laughed. He goes, "All right, you're living here. I've seen you every day for like a week." And I'm like, ah. And he goes, "You can't live in my parking lot." And I'm like, ah. And I made a joke. I've always, been fast. I made a joke about buying all my groceries there, but I'm living in the parking lot, so I'm certainly not keeping them in business. And he said, "Listen, here's the deal. It's a great big parking lot. As long as you're not in this corner every day, it'd be pretty hard to know that you're living here." And he kind of winked at me, right? And for the next, 2 weeks or whatever that I stayed there, I just kind of like moved around the parking lot every day. And I'm like, all right, I would have never thought of that. I've been parked in the same spot every single night for however long it'd been, a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. And he could have just said, "Get the hell out of here." But he didn't. He said, "Just move your car around enough." And I mean, I couldn't tell you that guy's name. I wish I knew it because I'd call him and tell him thank you. Um, there was a lady, a lunch lady, that when you're poor, and if you're listening to this and you grew up poor, you know what I mean. It's usually embarrassing. It shouldn't be embarrassing because you didn't make those choices, but it's embarrassing for some reason. And so I'd wait till the end of lunch to walk over to the lunch lady who had like the free lunches for the kids who got the state sponsored lunch or the city sponsored lunch, whatever. It wasn't delicious, but it was food. But I wouldn't do it at the beginning of lunch, and I didn't want anybody to see me. Always had a lot of pride. And anyway, I remember I'd walk over to her, and once she got to know me, she would give me a bag, and then she'd give me a second bag because she knew that that would be food like that evening, right? And she never made me feel bad. And I wish I knew her name because I'd call her and tell her how big of a deal she was in my life.
How
She
did
was just a
you
lunch lady giving a kid a couple bags of food.
mm, how did you figure out who you could trust and who you couldn't trust?
A leader in my life, who's passed away at this point, always used to say, this was much later at Keller Williams. She said, "Never trust what people say because people will say whatever they need to get you to agree to something." She goes, "Never trust what people say. You can oftentimes trust what they do, but don't always trust what they do either. But always trust their patterns." And of course, you could take that saying and take it wildly out of context, right? But the generality of that context is, people say whatever they need to. Words are cheap, and anybody could do something for a short period of time to get a result that they're after. That doesn't make them a great person. It just means they're willing to do it for a short period of time. But you can always lean on and trust people's patterns. When someone shows up a certain way multiple times, trust it. Yeah, that's who they are. And that's just as true when it's the way you want them to be, as it is just as true when it's something that you don't want them to be. Someone shows up multiple times as a liar or a cheater, or the kind of person you work with who is always somebody else's problem and it's always a victim or it's always not my fault or whatever. That doesn't need to happen more than a handful of times before you just go, "That's who that person is. That's who that person is." Or they're in a role that's the only way they know how to answer in that role. I see that a lot at the level I'm at today. You get people who show up horribly wrong in their role, but then they find a different role and they kill it. They crush it. And they were a total victim in a different role. But then they find some other job or some other company or some other team to work on, and they just go out and kill it. And so the older I've gotten, the more I've realized how important environment is for people. Does that environment allow them to win? Is it the right person at the right time? Yeah.
Uh, Favorite book, favorite inspirational type book. What have you found to be meaningful in your
The
life?
the only way I can answer the favorite book question is Lonesome Dove, which is it's a Western book written by Larry McMurtry. It's 900, I think it's 928 pages long. It might be 940 pages long, but it's over 900 pages long. And the only reason I can answer that way was my dad, who struggled with alcoholism and drugs. And I went and lived with him a handful of times. Went to see him a handful of times. Like when him and my mom were no longer together, I think I was about 10. And the last time I saw him, I was 15. So during that 5 year period, there'd be periods where I'd talk with him a lot and periods I wouldn't at all. I think I lived with him 6 different times during those 5 years. He was in California, we were in Alaska. It was a lot of moving. Anyway, I would have been about 11 or 10 when this story happened. He said, I'm not going to be able to teach you a lot about life, and I'm not going to be able to give you a lot in life, but this book can. And he handed me this book, Lonesome Dove. He said, if you'll read this, you'll learn all the lessons you need to know about life. And if you've read the book Lonesome Dove, no 10-year-old needs to be putting their nose in that book and reading it. I'm very clear on that. I mean, it was every lesson in life. And but I remember I read that book and I don't know how many times I read it, but I read it multiple times. And then when I was 12, 13, and I didn't hear from my dad for 6 months or 8 months or a year. And then for a portion of time, I knew that he was back in drugs. He was living under a bridge, but we didn't know where. Man, I read that book over and over and over again because it gave me something to be close to him with. So that's the only way I know how to answer that question. I
That's
don't
great.
know. I don't know that I've read a book since, and I've read a lot. Um, I don't know that I've read a book since that's had a bigger impact on me. But of course, that was because my dad gave it to me. And that was, I don't know that he ever gave me anything else. He gave me a cookie or whatever, right? But I don't know that he gave me anything else. But he gave me that. I still have the book. Man, it's beat up, tore up, old, raggedy. I remember after he had died, I was angry and I like threw the book and I was so mad. Some of the pages came out. I was like, when I ran over there, like, pick the pages back up and put it back in. It was one of those moments where you realize the way you're feeling right now is a scam. It's not the way you really feel. You're just upset.
Hmm.
Because the moment I thought that that book was hurt, I changed my mind about how I felt about it.
Well, I would say, wrapping up because I do need you to move on. I know you got a lot of people looking for you. Um, Empowering what is the right word, and I thank you for the empowerment that you brought to us today, for the words of wisdom and the experiences that you've had that might touch somebody's life to say, yeah, I'm inspired. I might do better. And that's what we're all about here. So I can't thank you enough for spending the time, Cody. And, on a quick introduction and a quick ask, you saying yes says an awful lot about your willingness to help other people. I'm grateful.
No, it's my pleasure. It's been my honor to be here. Thanks for giving me a space to share some of that. For me, it was Gary that pulled me aside a few years ago, been a while ago, and said, Cody, you should tell the other part of the story. I said, what do you mean? And he's like, yeah. He goes, we always hear about these sales or this or that. He goes, that's all really cool, but I know who you are and where you come from. You should tell that part of the story. And I'm like, I don't want to. And he goes, I didn't ask if you wanted to. I told you you should be telling that part of the story. And he said, I think what you'll find is number one, it'll be very therapeutic for you. And number two, you might be able to help more people faster by telling that part of the story. And he was 100% right on both counts. So thanks for
Gary
giving me the
Keller,
space. Like every time I
100%.
get to share some of those stories, very therapeutic for me and helps
Mm,
people. So again, thanks to Gary, Andy was right again.
right again. Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you, Cody. Real honor, real
Thank
privilege.
you. It's been my pleasure.
Yes. And on to your day. And perhaps another time we'll run into each other.
I would love that. All right, Rick, thanks for being patient when we were trying to get in here.
Oh, no. Thank you for the patience. Appreciate it. Have a great
All
day,
right, sir.
Cody.
See ya.
Yeah. God bless you.
Thank you.